What if the one person who saved a billionaire's heir had nothing to offer but leftover toast and kindness? Every morning, she gave him a sandwich. No name, no questions, just quiet compassion in a world that had none left. And then, one morning, 4 black SUVs pulled up outside her diner. She thought she was in trouble, but the world was about to find out that the most powerful force isn't money, it's mercy. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the diner lights were already flickering on. Ella zipped up her faded jacket, pulled her apron from the hook near the sink, and tied it around her waist with practiced hands. The place smelled of burnt coffee and yesterday's grease, something most people would turn their noses up at. But to Ella, it was the scent of survival. She wiped down the same cracked linoleum counter she'd cleaned every morning for the past 3 years. It was a routine she could do in her sleep. Coffee pots, ketchup bottles, sugar dispensers, all lined up like soldiers. This wasn't a 5-star restaurant. It wasn't even a decent roadside stop. But it kept her breathing. Outside, frost crept along the edges of the window. Winter in rural Texas was cruel in its own quiet way. Not brutal like the Northeast, but mean, bitter, sharp, especially to the poor. Ella glanced toward the back door. He would be there soon. She reached under the counter and pulled out a paper bag she had prepped the night before. Inside were a half-burnt blueberry muffin, a boiled egg, and a napkin-wrapped sandwich she'd made from leftover bacon and toast. Not much, but it was warm. And for a boy with no home, warmth was gold. Right on time, there was a soft knock, 2 quick taps, then silence. Ella opened the door just a crack. There he was, Leo, skin pale, cheeks red from the cold, eyes sharp, watchful, far too adult for someone barely 12. He didn't speak, he never did. She handed him the bag. He took it without a word, gave her a quick nod, half gratitude, half goodbye, and slipped back into the alley shadows. Ella closed the door slowly and leaned against it, her breath fogging up in the cold draft. She didn't know where he went after. She didn't ask. All she knew was he came every morning, and she would always be there. The diner filled slowly as the sky turned a milky pink. Truckers, night shift nurses, 2 elderly veterans who ordered the same damn pancakes every day. Ella served them all with a practiced smile. She wasn't bubbly. She wasn't rude, just efficient. But her mind drifted to the boy, to where he slept when it rained. How long could he survive the streets? To how no one seemed to care. The owner, Big Ronnie B.U.Y.E., waddled in around 8 man, clutching his 3rd donut of the morning. "Ella," he grunted, "you leave anything out back last night?" She froze. "No, sir. Why?" He scratched his belly. "Found footprints by the dumpster. Think we got a stray sniffing around. I don't want no damn hobos bothering customers." "I'll keep an eye out," she said, voice steady. He nodded and lumbered into his office. Ella exhaled slowly. Leo was smart, careful, but if Big Ronnie found out... She shook the thought off and poured another cup of coffee for the nurse in booth 4. That night, as Ella walked home through the cracked sidewalks and flickering streetlights, she passed the alley by instinct. There was no sign of him, only a crumpled napkin she recognized from the morning, placed neatly on top of an empty bag. He never left trash. It was his way of saying thank you. She smiled faintly, tucked the napkin into her pocket like a secret, and kept walking. Some people measure their wealth in dollars. Ella measured hers in crumbs, and every crumb she gave away felt like a piece of herself being used for something good, something real. What she didn't know was that someone had already started watching. And soon, the world would come knocking. Ella hadn't known his real name for weeks. He never said it, and she never pushed. In her notebook, she simply wrote Alley Boy, keeping track of what she gave him. A day-old donut, warm soup in a thermos, a bandage for a scraped knee. One time, a pair of socks. In return, he gave her nothing. Nothing except something she couldn't explain. An odd sense of being seen. In a life where most people looked through her, this boy with ragged shoes and a stare like broken glass actually looked at her. One morning, she opened the back door to find he wasn't there. She waited. 5 minutes. 10. No knock. Worry crawled into her chest. She stepped outside and scanned the alley. Empty. But when she turned back, a folded note was tucked into the gap between the bricks beside the door. Her name was written on the front in neat, almost painfully careful handwriting. Ella. She opened it. "Thank you for the socks. My feet don't hurt anymore. I found a place to stay. A little while. I'll be back soon. Please don't stop leaving the sandwich. She read it twice. Then again. That was the first time she cried in weeks, not for herself, but because someone remembered her name. 3 days later, he came back. He knocked once. When she opened the door, he looked the same. Hair messy, hoodie too big, but his hands were cleaner, his face less pale. "You all right?" she asked. He hesitated, then nodded. "You got a name?" she asked. He hesitated again, then said, "Leo." She smiled. "Okay, Leo. Hungry?" He nodded faster this time. From that day, it became a ritual. He never came during lunch rush. Always dawn, always quiet. She gave what she could, sometimes slipping in fruit when they had too much, sometimes just half her own sandwich. And he always left something behind. A bottle cap, a feather. Once a small plastic ring. It became a strange kind of language between them. A secret conversation in a world that had forgotten how to listen. But not everyone was blind. Karen, the other waitress, noticed the food disappearing. "You feeding stray animals back there?" she asked one morning. Ella shrugged. "Something like that." Karen didn't press. She had her own problems, but her eyes narrowed in curiosity. Big Ronnie, however, didn't miss the growing shrinkage in leftovers. One morning, he slammed the fridge shut and barked, "Someone's been dipping into the waste bin again." Ella just wiped the counter and said nothing. Because how do you explain to someone like Ronnie that waste to him was survival to someone else? That evening, as she was closing up, she found Leo waiting outside the front entrance. He never came to the front. She opened the door, concerned. "What's wrong?" He held up a small notebook, torn edges, dirty cover. "I drew something." He flipped it open to a pencil sketch of her, hair in a messy bun, apron tied, holding a paper bag. "You did this?" she whispered. He nodded. "You look tired in real life. I made you smile here." She stared at it for a long time, then reached out and hugged him. He didn't hug back, but he didn't pull away either. Later that night, she taped the drawing inside her locker, right above the one good photograph she had of her late father. Leo didn't know, but in that moment, he had become family. It started with the whispers. They weren't loud, just sharp enough to be heard when Ella walked past the kitchen doors or lingered too long at the staff sink. "Some people care more about rats than rent," muttered Sam, the line cook, wiping his greasy hands on his apron. Karen chimed in once with a smirk. "She's always losing muffins. Must be feeding her imaginary boyfriend out back." Ella kept quiet. It wasn't worth the fight. Not when she had rent due in 3 days and tips had been dismal all week. Not when Big Ronnie was in a mood again and any excuse could get her fired. But when she opened the fridge and found an empty tray where the leftovers usually sat, her stomach turned. Someone had thrown them out, deliberately. Leo didn't show up the next morning. No knock, no bag, only silence. Ella paced for hours. When the shift ended, she slipped out the back and wandered the alley, her breath fogging up in the bitter air. Her boots crunched against broken glass and frozen leaves. Then she saw it, a smear of ketchup, barely visible, on the brick wall where he usually leaned. A paper napkin fluttering near the dumpster, nothing else. He had come, but left with nothing. The next day, Ella confronted Ronnie. "Did you throw away the leftovers?" He didn't look up from his coffee. "Food's for paying customers, not for strays." She gritted her teeth. "He's a child. He's a thief," Ronnie shot back. "Don't think I haven't seen him snooping around. My diner isn't a damn charity. If he comes back, I'll call the cops." Ella stared at him for a long time. "I'll take the risk," she said quietly. Ronnie slammed his cup down. "You do that again, you're out. One warning, Ella." She didn't respond. Because what do you say to a man whose heart is made of price tags? That evening, she waited in the alley again. She left nothing behind, not even a crumb. But she waited, and just as the wind picked up and she turned to go, she heard it. A cough. She turned. Leo was crouched behind the dumpster, hoodie pulled over his head, arms wrapped tight around his knees. She rushed to him. "What happened? Are you hurt?" He shook his head. "They were here, last night. 2 men. One had a stick." Her blood froze. "Did they touch you?" He shook his head again, but wouldn't look her in the eye. "They said I was bad for business. Said you'd lose your job." Ella sank down beside him. "You're not bad for anything. You shouldn't get in trouble for me," he whispered. She blinked fast, holding back tears. "If I lose my job for feeding someone who's hungry, then maybe I shouldn't have it in the first place." He looked at her. "Why are you nice to me?" She didn't answer right away, because kindness was never something she explained. It was something she gave. Finally, she said, Because someone once was nice to me when I didn't deserve it. That one kindness saved my life. Leo looked away. I don't want to make yours harder. You're not, she said. You're reminding me why I wake up every morning. They sat like that for a while, two souls in the cold, bound not by blood, but by something stronger. Shared brokenness and stubborn hope. But behind a frosted window inside the diner, a figure watched, phone in hand, eyes narrowed, and somewhere far from the alley, a signal was sent. The boy has been found. The morning began like any other. Ella wiped down the coffee counter with her usual tired rhythm. Karen was late. Ronnie was grumbling. The fryer hissed and spat oil into the air. Outside, snow flurries floated gently in the gray light, dusting the sidewalk in a thin white veil. At 6:52 a.m., the first SUV appeared, jet black, windows tinted so dark it looked like a shadow on wheels. It didn't park in the lot. It rolled slowly in front of the diner, engine humming, then stopped. A minute later, the second one pulled up behind it, then a third, then a fourth. By 6:57, the entire block had fallen silent. Even Ronnie looked up from his register. What the hell? Customers turned to look, forks frozen halfway to their mouths. Karen, who had just walked in through the back, dropped her phone. Ella stepped out from behind the counter. Her heart was already pounding. Something in her gut twisted, and she knew they weren't here for pancakes. The back doors of the lead SUV opened. Two men in black coats stepped out, scanning the street like they were clearing a security zone. A third stepped forward, tall, lean, with a sharpness in his posture that screamed military. He opened the passenger door and nodded respectfully. Then came the man, gray suit, cane in one hand, power in his eyes. Not loud power, not the kind that barked orders or slammed fists, the kind that owned things, silently, completely. He stepped onto the sidewalk, adjusted his coat, and looked directly into the diner's window. And then he walked in. The door chimed. No one moved. He stood in the entrance, brushing snowflakes from his shoulder, eyes sweeping the room like he was measuring souls. Ella's breath caught. He wasn't looking at the customers. He was looking for someone. Then his eyes landed on her, and he smiled. Thin, controlled, but polite. You're Ella, yes? Ronnie jumped in, trying to take control. Sir, if you're looking for a table. I'm not, the man said, without even turning to him. His gaze stayed locked on Ella. I'm looking for the woman who's been feeding my grandson. Gasps. Forks clattered. Karen dropped her tray. Ella blinked. Excuse me? The man walked closer. My name is Alaric Langston. Perhaps you've heard it. Everyone had. Alaric Langston, the billionaire who controlled half the oil infrastructure in Texas. Owner of the Langston Group. Private jets, political influence, cities in his palm. Ella's legs went cold. Leo, she whispered. Langston's face softened, just barely. You know him as Leo. We've been looking for him for nearly a year. Ella couldn't breathe. You're his grandfather, he nodded. He ran away from home after his parents died. My son, daughter-in-law, car accident. I tried everything. Police, posters, bribes. He paused. But none of them could do what you did. Ella's voice cracked. I didn't do anything. That's not true, he said. You fed him. You gave him shelter in your silence. You made him trust again. She gripped the edge of the counter. I never asked who he was. He was hungry. Langston looked at her like he'd never seen someone like her before, which is exactly why he came to you. Just then the door opened again, and Leo stepped inside, not in rags, in a black coat, gloves, clean clothes, but the same eyes. Ella's hand flew to her mouth. Hey, he said softly. Tears burned her throat. Are you okay? She asked. He nodded. I told them I'd only come back if they let me see you first. Langston looked at Leo. You were right. Leo turned to Ella. I'm sorry I lied. You never lied, she whispered. You just didn't tell me. Langston cleared his throat. Ms. Ella, I would like to invite you to our estate. Leo insists. Ronnie snorted. This ain't a damn soap opera. Langston didn't even blink. He turned to one of his men. Buy this diner, triple its value, and then shut it down. Ronnie turned white. Ella stepped forward, panic in her chest. Please don't. Langston raised a hand. No retaliation, just gratitude. The boy who refused every hand reached for yours. He looked at her one last time. And if you'll allow it, I'd like you to be part of his future. Ella stared at Leo, then at the 4 black SUVs, then back at her cracked diner tiles. A world was waiting, and she hadn't even packed her coat yet. The Langston estate was nothing like Ella had imagined. It wasn't just a mansion, it was an entire world tucked behind high stone walls and iron gates. A forest-lined driveway stretched nearly half a mile before the main house appeared like something out of a European novel. Marble columns, manicured hedges, and a quiet so overwhelming it pressed against the lungs. Ella stepped out of the SUV clutching the coat Leo had placed over her shoulders. She didn't speak. She hadn't spoken much since they left the diner. The boy beside her, still Leo, but somehow older in the silence, walked confidently now, like he belonged. But every so often he'd glance at her, as if to make sure she was still real. Inside, the warmth was immediate. Golden chandeliers, velvet furniture, staff who bowed slightly without eye contact. She hated it. It felt like walking into someone else's movie, someone richer, colder, more polished. Leo tugged gently on her sleeve and led her through the maze of rooms until they stopped at a quiet hallway. On the walls were portraits, old men in suits, women in pearls, a few children frozen forever in oil paint. At the very end hung a photo, a young man with Leo's eyes and Ella's quiet intensity. He stood beside a woman with sunlight in her smile. "My parents," Leo said softly. "I didn't want their money. I just wanted them back." Ella reached for his hand. He held on tightly. "My grandfather tried," he added, "but everything felt like a transaction, until you." She turned to him, her voice low. "Leo, I never asked for this." "I know," he said. "That's why it's yours." Later, over tea in a library larger than her entire apartment complex, Alaric Langston entered, not as a billionaire, but as a man carefully holding back a flood. He sat across from Ella and slid a folder across the table. "I had you vetted," he said plainly. "I had to." Ella didn't touch the folder. And no arrests, no debt. Just a girl working 3 jobs and giving away what little she had. He leaned back. "You could have used him. You didn't. Because he's not something to use," she replied. Alaric studied her. "Which is why I need your help." He opened another file. It showed a boardroom. Men in suits. One photo was circled in red. "This man," Langston said, "my business partner of 20 years, may have had a hand in my son's death." Ella's eyes widened. "You think it wasn't an accident? The car was tampered with, but I couldn't prove it then. Now, I have reason to believe Leo was the real target." Ella stared at him. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because he listens to you. Because he trusts you more than anyone," Alaric paused. "And because I think I do too." That night, Ella wandered the garden outside her guest room, stunned by the stars. She felt like a girl standing at the edge of someone else's fate. She had come from a diner. She had folded napkins and refilled coffee and quietly fed a child because it was the only thing she could control in a life built on struggle. Now, billionaires were handing her folders and asking for her trust. And that child? He had pulled her into a storm much bigger than both of them. Behind her, Leo stood quietly. "It's okay if you want to leave," he said. "I won't be mad." Ella turned slowly. "You know what scares me the most?" "What?" he asked. "That I don't want to." And he stepped closer. "Then stay, please." And for the first time, she felt not small, but chosen. Not overwhelmed, but powerful. Maybe not because of who she was, but because of what she gave. And because, for reasons still unraveling like thread in the wind, she was no longer invisible. The next morning, Ella woke to a letter slipped under her door. The paper was thick, embossed with the Langston seal, folded crisply into 3 perfect lines. Inside, in handwriting that wasn't Alaric's, were only 2 sentences. "Meet me in the South Conservatory at 9 a.m. Come alone." It was signed with a single initial, C. She dressed carefully, plain blouse, her only decent jeans, and walked through marble corridors that still made her feel like a stranger. The conservatory was a greenhouse built like a cathedral. Glass walls arched high above, flooding everything in sunlight and silence. A man stood at the far end, near a tall ficus tree. He wasn't Alaric. His suit was darker. His expression calmed, cold, calculated. "You're Ella," he said, not as a question. "Yes. I'm Conrad Blake. I run security and internal affairs for the Langston Group. I'm also the one keeping the media away from you." She said nothing. Conrad gestured to a small table. On it sat a folder, and beside it, a check. Ella didn't move. "What is this?" He smiled slightly. "A reward. For your beer, for your silence, and for your distance." Her eyes narrowed. "Distance?" He tapped to the folder. "Leo is a kind boy, but he's unstable, unfit for the pressures he's about to inherit. He needs structure, not sentiment." He leaned in. "You've done your part. This," he pointed at the check, "is more than you'll make in 10 years. Walk away now, and your future is secure." Ella stared at the amount. 6 zeros. Enough to pay every bill she'd ever feared. Enough to escape the life that had caged her since she was 15. But then she thought of Leo, of the look in his eyes when he told her he felt safe, of how he held onto her sleeve in the back of that SUV. Not because he needed a savior, but because he finally had a friend. Ella's voice was quiet but clear. "If he's unstable, it's because people like you keep trying to buy him." Conrad blinked, just once. "I won't take your money," she said. "I'm not for sale." He smiled, but this time it was tight. "You misunderstand. This wasn't an offer." She straightened. "Then consider this my refusal anyway." As she turned to leave, he said, "Walk away now, and we won't touch you. Stay. And you'll learn that in this world, love is a liability." Ella didn't turn around. "I'm not afraid of your world," she said, "because in mine, love is the only thing that ever saved anyone." She walked out of the conservatory without looking back. Hours later, Leo found her in the West Garden, her hands buried in flower beds no one asked her to tend. "You okay?" he asked. "Someone tried to buy me today," she said. He froze. "Who?" "It doesn't matter." She turned to him. "What matters is that I said no." Leo looked like he wanted to say something, but couldn't. Instead, he sat beside her on the ground, in the dirt and the sunlight, and took her hand. And in that moment, Ella knew something unshakable had shifted. She wasn't just protecting him anymore. She was choosing him, even if the world tried to break them apart. The diner looked smaller than she remembered. 2 weeks had passed since the SUVs came and went like a dream, since Leo disappeared into a life that Ella had never asked to be part of. She hadn't returned, not out of pride, but because the place no longer felt like hers. She spent most of her days now at the Langston estate, quietly helping with Leo's tutoring schedule, organizing his sketchbooks, and turning down press inquiries she never imagined she'd receive. But her heart still beat for quiet mornings, cracked mugs, and the smell of burnt toast. So, when Leo asked her, softly, nervously, if they could visit the diner one more time, she said yes without thinking. They arrived in a black town car that parked discreetly across the street. No SUVs, no guards. Just Leo in a navy pea coat and Ella in a sweater borrowed from the estate's guest closet. She opened the diner door and stepped inside. The bell above the frame jingled like always. But everything else had changed. Karen froze mid-pour. Sam blinked from behind the counter. And Ronnie, who had once threatened to call the cops on a boy with cold hands, went pale. "Ella," he stammered, "you're back?" She didn't answer, not yet, because behind her, Leo stepped in, head high, eyes scanning the place like it was a memory made real. He didn't speak to anyone. He just walked to the booth in the back corner, the same one he used to watch from across the alley, and sat down. Ella followed, heart thudding. They sat in silence for a moment, until Leo finally said, "I used to watch you from here, you know, through the back window. You always hummed when you poured coffee." She smiled. "It kept me sane." He looked up. "You kept me alive." His words landed softly, but deeply. She didn't respond, not with words, just a look. And he nodded, like he understood. A few minutes later, Sam brought over 2 hot chocolates. No charge, no one dared speak much. But eyes followed them, whispers hummed under breath. Leo didn't seem to care. He pulled something from his coat pocket, a box, small, velvet, blue. "I was supposed to wait," he said, "but I think I've waited enough." Ella stared at it, her breath catching. "Leo, what?" "Not what you think," he said quickly. "I'm not proposing, not yet." He opened the box. Inside was a pendant, delicate and gold, shaped like a small compass. "You always guided me," he whispered. "Even when I didn't know where I was going." Ella's throat tightened. He took her hand and pressed the necklace into her palm. "This is a reminder that no matter where I go, you're home." She closed her fingers around it slowly. "Leo, I'm not your mother." "I know. And I'm not your sister." "I know. Then what am I?" He looked at her like the answer had always been obvious. You're the only person who ever loved me without asking for anything in return. And the bell above the diner rang again. This time it wasn't customers. It was cameras, press, a man in a suit with a voice too loud. Leo Langston returns to the diner where he was found. Security guards moved in fast, blocking the shots. Ella stood up, instinctively shielding Leo, but he held her arm. Don't run, he said. Let them see. See what? She asked, breathless. The truth, he replied. He walked to the window, faced the reporters, and said, I want the world to know this place saved me. That woman saved me. Her name is Ella. She's not a Langston. She doesn't need to be, because love doesn't require a last name. The flashbulbs went crazy, but Ella didn't hear them. She just heard the quiet voice of the boy who had once knocked twice behind her kitchen door. And in that moment, with the world watching, she realized something more shocking than all the headlines. She had never been invisible. She had always been the center of someone's universe. Ella never wanted a spotlight, but somehow the world kept turning toward her. After that day at the diner, the story spread like wildfire. Waitress who fed billionaire heir speaks out. From crumbs to compass, the woman behind Leo Langston. Her reporters camped outside her small apartment until the Langston family quietly relocated her into a private guest house on their estate. At her protest, of course, but eventually with her quiet consent, because what started as protection became something else entirely. Alaric Langston asked her to stay, not just for Leo, but for the family. We need someone who reminds us what real looks like, he said one evening, pouring her tea like she was royalty. Not someone we can buy, someone who makes us better. She didn't say yes that night, but she didn't say no either, because deep inside, Ella had begun to understand. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was shaping something, and she had earned it. Not through wealth, not through bloodline, but through decency. Months passed, Leo bloomed. With Ella at his side, he returned to school, began art therapy, and reconnected with parts of himself even his grandfather couldn't reach. The board members who once saw him as a liability now looked at him with a new kind of reverence. And when Alaric announced publicly that Leo was to inherit the Langston legacy, with Ella as his legal guardian until he turned 18, there was no opposition, no press spin, no outrage, only applause. But Ella wasn't interested in power. She turned down every invitation to exclusive galas, every magazine cover, every documentary offer. What she didn't turn down, however, was the small community center that Leo proposed they build together, right next to the diner where it all began. It would feed homeless children, offer night classes, and every plate served would carry a small engraving at the bottom, for the one who gives without asking. One quiet evening, under soft garden lights at the estate, Leo approached her, holding something behind his back. He was taller now, stronger, but his voice still held the same tremble when something mattered. You told me once that you weren't my mother, or my sister, or anything you could name, he smiled. But I think I finally know what you are. He pulled out a small box, this time a real velvet one, and opened it. Inside wasn't a ring, but a key. To your new home, he said, because this place isn't a palace without you in it. You made it human again. Ella took the key, speechless. He looked down, almost shy. You saved me, Ella. Now, let me build something with you. She knelt down, wrapped her arms around him, and for the first time since they met, he hugged her first. And in that moment, there was no Langston fortune, no titles, no secrets, just a boy who had once been invisible, and a woman who never stopped seeing him. The next day, the New York Times published a piece with a single headline that said it all. She never asked for the crown, but she wore it better than anyone. And they mocked her, called her foolish, said she'd never matter. But when the cameras rolled, when the suits came knocking, when the world searched for the heart behind an empire, it wasn't the CEO, the lawyer, or the heiress they found. It was a tired waitress, with scraped shoes and a quiet spine of steel. She didn't ask for fame. She didn't want fortune. She just wanted one boy not to go hungry. And that changed everything. So, next time you walk past someone small, someone unseen, remember Ella, because sometimes the girl feeding crumbs in silence is the one holding the whole kingdom together.